Secrets are a big part of the fun of being a dungeon master. Finally pulling off a twist that you've been plotting for months is absolutely amazing. However, a lot of DMs have a habit of keeping much less interesting information, like a creature's armor class, just as hidden as their plot twists, which, while not necessarily wrong, might not be the best way to run a game. Hey everybody, and welcome to Arcran's Arcanum. I'm Arcran, and today we're talking about how revealing ACs, DCs, and other numbers to your party can help speed up your game, as well as help your players make more tactical choices in combat and more informed choices outside of combat. Let's get started. The first and likely most obvious benefit of revealing more numbers to your players is that it simply speeds up your game, especially once you reach higher levels of play when every character is constantly making saving throws and your martial characters are able to attack multiple times. Sharing numbers with your players is a huge boon to speed of play. By telling your players the target number, they can simply tell you whether they succeeded or failed, skipping over the monotonous task of asking a player what they rolled and then confirming whether or not it succeeded or failed. Making numbers a bit more transparent in your game can also help to enhance your storytelling and make sure your players can always make informed decisions. No matter how good your description is, at the end of the day, numbers are how your players interact with the world, and numbers are the best way to establish how difficult something is. You could spend as much time as you want describing the difficulties of climbing a cliff versus climbing a rope, but at the end of the day, simply saying that the rope is DC 5 and the cliff is DC 15 provides much better information and sets the expectation much better for players. Where players might have wildly different opinions about how difficult something should be based on their own personal experience or based on the description itself. But as soon as you give them a number, they immediately have a good ballpark for how likely their character is to succeed at that task. As an example from my own game, my party was chasing after a shapeshifter who had ran into a crowd and disguised herself as a commoner. She rolled extremely high on her deception check and the DC ended up being a 29. When I told my party that DC, it immediately conveyed the difficulty of the situation and illustrated how it would be nearly impossible to find her by conventional means. Their attitude immediately shifted away from a simple skill check, and they started to think of clever ways to smoke her out of the crowd and consulted their spell list to see if they had anything that might help them identify a shapeshifted creature. On top of that, it got ahead of any player frustration that might have occurred from trying to find her with a skill check. Normally, a 25 or a 26 is an incredible skill check, but in this specific situation, it wouldn't have been good enough. A typical reason why some DMs keep this information hidden is that they feel it damages the suspension of disbelief in the game. Personally, I find that this enhances the experience and helps to bridge the gap between what a player knows and what their character in the game would know. In real life, when you assess whether or not you think you should be able to accomplish something, you're drawing upon information that's hard to convey in D&D, like your own personal experience and small details in the environment. Providing your players with the DC for a check helps to emulate this knowledge and provides them with some benchmark about whether their character should be able to accomplish the task or not. It lets your players make informed decisions and lets them decide when it might be worth it to cast fly rather than trying to climb a cliff. Letting your players make more informed and more tactical decisions is one of the biggest benefits of sharing more information with them. Strategy RPGs like XCOM or Fire Emblem are a great example about how sharing more information can make your game more tactical and more interesting. Those games are almost entirely open information, but it only really serves to enhance the tactics of those games. Because you know how likely you are to hit or how much damage you're likely to do, you can make better use of your characters and ensure that all of them are doing what they're supposed to do at any given time. Revealing more of the numbers involved in gameplay lets your players know when they can gamble on powerful abilities like Sharpshooter, and when the cleric should really cast Bless to help defend against a save-based ability with a very high DC. Now, this is by definition metagaming, but metagaming isn't always a bad thing. In this case, we're simply accurately conveying the difficulty of certain tasks and helping to make sure that our players can make best use of their character's abilities. On top of that, many of these secret numbers don't stay secret for long, especially in combat. If one player rolls a 15 to hit an enemy and hits, and another rolls a 14 to hit and misses, your players know exactly what that creature's armor class is. While we're on the topic, let's talk about a related rule that is hidden throughout 5th edition and really only exists to cause player heartbreak. It has a few variations, but the version from Bardic Inspiration conveys the gist of it. The creature can wait until after it rolls the d20 before deciding to use the Bardic Inspiration die, but must decide before the DM says whether the roll succeeds or fails. You see similar wording in the Shield spell and the Artificer's Flash of Genius, among other abilities in 5th edition. The problem is that, in play, this ability is pretty clunky and unwieldy to use unless you intentionally withhold information from your players. A situation almost every DM has likely encountered is saying the result of a roll too early when a player had intended to use something like Bardic Inspiration but hadn't quite declared that they were going to use it. What do you do in this situation? Religiously stick to rules as written even though it's your fault that the player can't use that ability? Or let the player use that ability even though it's breaking the holy rules as written? Now, it's not impossible to follow this rule. All you have to do is wait for your players to roll, let them announce their roll, ask if they want to use an ability on their roll, wait for their answer, and then, and only then, tell them the result of the roll. If that sounds slow and clunky to you, that's because it is. It's only going to slow down your speed of play and waste time where you could actually be playing Dungeons & Dragons. If that isn't enough to convince you that this is a flawed mechanic, it also only really exists to make players waste resources in situations where they normally wouldn't. A monk spending ki to boost the attack roll of an attack that already hit, or a wizard casting shield to try to block an attack that hit them by more than 5, both are a waste of a resource that the player wouldn't choose to do, but because the system needlessly hides that information, might end up doing. Now, if you've been keeping up with this channel, you know that everything I do has the intent to make players spend resources, but even I don't like this mechanic. It's not spending resources in a clever way to get through encounters, it's making players waste resources in a way that only really makes them feel bad. Fortunately, the fix for this unwieldy rule is simple. Just ignore it. If a player fails a roll by 1, tell them and let them make good use of their Bardic Inspiration. If a character has the Shield spell, don't tell them that they were hit, tell them the result of the roll so they can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to use that spell slot. It will speed up your game, it'll help improve the flow of combat, and most importantly, it makes sure that your players aren't just wasting abilities in situations where they don't matter. It doesn't feel good for your players, and honestly, it's just false difficulty. In general, anytime we can take an ability that is a blind gamble and instead make it an informed choice that the player gets to trigger based on the situation, we've done a good job of improving our tactical combat and improving the flow of the game. And with that final note, we're done. Providing your players with the armor class of enemies and the difficulty class of various checks helps to improve the flow of your game, improves the speed of your game, and helps to ensure that your players are always making informed tactical choices, or at least have the ability to make informed tactical choices. If you have any thoughts about whether it's good or bad to share this much information with your players, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Either way, thanks for stopping by the Arcanum and have a great day.